Roll forth the artillery, for today we're comparing the Basilisk and the Manticore. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy and tactics focused 40k channel, where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. Now, the Basilisk and the Manticore were fairly different beasts in 7th edition due to the low AP that the Manticore had. As we've moved into 8th and the blast template rules have gone the way of the dodo, they now fill a very similar role in the Imperial Guard arsenal. They both put out very high strength shots with decent AP and D3 damage, and can hit units out of line of sight at excessively long range. They really are in direct competition for the same role in the Imperial Guard army. So in today's video I thought that we'd math out the damage and durability of the two tanks and look at other external factors that might convince us to take one over the other. First of all, we'll have them take aim at some likely targets, so without further ado, let's get into it. So on this first slide we have the damage output where we're looking at one Basilisk's Earthshaker cannon versus one of the Manticore's Storm Eagle rockets. This is just the raw damage output, it's not weighted point for point yet. As we can see, the Manticore does have a decently increased damage output, as we'd expect, as it costs a lot more than the Basilisk. One Manticore will outshoot the Basilisk in all areas. It's particularly noticeable when invul savers are in play, where you can expect your Manticore to do over 50% increased damage on things like Contemptors or Imperial Knights, for example. For those interested, the maths on the number of Basilisk shots works out as 4¼ shots on average each turn. So typically you can expect 4 or 5 on average. The Manticore on its 2d6 will naturally have a average 7 shots. But let's take a look at these numbers once we account for their points differential. So now we can also see the numbers of the expected damage output of 100 points worth of each unit. The Basilisk with a heavy bolter is 108 points and the Manticore is 133. The Manticore is equal or better against all of these targets, from intercessors to vehicles to Leman Russes. It's only very slightly better against intercessors, and it's actually almost exactly equal in terms of damage output once they're in cover, as the extra AP of the Basilisk comes into more effect. It's also pretty much equal when we're targeting standard vehicles, Leman Russes or toughness 7 vehicles. That tiny bit of extra efficiency is barely worth noting, but it is noticeably more efficient whenever we have a 5+ invul save, such as if we were taking aim at the Contemptor Dread on this list, or Imperial Knights, where they'd have the exact same damage profile against. If we did look at a 2-up save model in cover, which is a lot more common than it used to be with Space Marine Centurions and Leviathans stomping around, the Basilisk would win out here, the extra pip of AP coming into its own. So overall, in terms of damage output, the Manticore wins against targets with a good invul save. It's almost even on anything with a 3+ armor save, but a slight win for the Manticore. It is pretty much even on a 2-up armor save, and the Basilisk wins on a 2-up armor save in cover. So broadly a victory for the Manticore in my opinion. So that's damage output, but let's take a look at how well these tanks stand up to enemy fire. Now these are the durability profiles of the Basilisk and Manticore. We have weighted for points on this example, so these are the number of hits needed to kill 100 points worth of each unit. They're both vehicles with 11 wounds, the only defensive difference being that the Basilisk is toughness 6, where the Manticore is toughness 7. Now this sounds like a big deal, but it actually only ever comes into effect when we're talking about strength 6, 7 or 12 weapons. They're not uncommon, but also there's a lot of serious anti-tank firepower that's strength 8 or above, and the Manticore's increased armour certainly won't help it at all against these. We can see from this table that the Basilisk is more durable against the bolter, the missile launcher and the las cannon, but it's slightly more susceptible to autocannon fire, and the same would be replicated for any strength 6 guns, although honestly the difference between their durability for strength 6 and 7 weapons is relatively minor. So on the whole, I'd conclude that the Basilisk is slightly more durable than the Manticore, though of course it does depend on what sort of threats you're facing in terms of damage output, and potentially in an ideal world you'd be trying to aim to be out of line of sight, though I would note for the Basilisk it's rather hard to be out of line of sight with that very big Earthshaker cannon, but that's one more slight advantage for the Manticore. So the Manticore has slightly better damage against most of the field, and the Basilisk is slightly more durable based on the base numbers. But in all honesty, they're quite well balanced in both of these areas. So what happens when we bring stratagems and other external factors into play? On the Manticore's side, it makes slightly better use of the Kaschan doctrine if you are playing Kaschans, or the new regimental trait Gunnery Experts that allows you to reroll 1 dice when determining how many shots a big heavy weapon has on a tank. It's a bit better than the Basilisk because the Basilisk already rolls 2 dice and picks the highest, so there's less scope for improvement. The difference isn't big, but it is a slight increase in the Manticore's firepower compared with the Basilisk's when in this doctrine. From the new Greater Good book, we have a Manticore-specific stratagem called Direct Fire. This is a 1 command point stratagem that if your Manticore can see its target, then you add +1 to hit. Nice and simple, an extra damage buff for a powerful anti-tank weapon. Though it's not absolutely stellar in terms of return on investment, it will typically lead to you inflicting around about 1 extra wound on an armoured target on average. Whether that's worth a command point or not to you is kind of up to you. Again, from the new Greater Good book, we have the tank ace rules, and these in particular tend to favour the Manticore rather than the Basilisk, as it's a bigger tank that has more shots. The tank ace rule that gives all of its missiles a flat 3 damage rather than D3 is more powerful to take on the Manticore than the Basilisk, unless you are using the Basilisk to double fire in the Vigilist detachment. The Manticore also gets more out of the re-rolling shots tank ace trait from the detachment, although typically I'd usually want to take that flat 3 damage trait rather than the re-roll of shots, as it will get you more damage by far against armoured targets. If we look over the Basilisk now, its first really major advantage is the fact that it doesn't run out of ammo when you get into the last few turns of the game. The Storm Eagle rockets only have 4 shots, and you also waste them if you need to fire them in Overwatch when you're at risk of getting tied down. Now, front-loading the damage isn't a particularly bad thing in Warhammer 40k. In general, many games will be pretty much decided by turn 4, with one player's armies lying in tatters. There will certainly be games that are a lot more close though, where you're scrambling around for the last few objectives and trying to eliminate the last few enemy troops that are holding them. Getting an extra couple of turns worth of Basilisk fire could genuinely make the difference between victory and defeat in some missions, if they manage to eliminate the last few enemy troops holding a key objective that you can't reach otherwise. It is definitely a notable advantage. The other big advantage that the Basilisk has, and probably the one that has generally led to people taking them over Manticores in competitive play for the last few months, is the access to the Vigilist detachment, the Emperor's Wrath Artillery Company. The Basilisk can profit from every single part of this detachment. He can ignore cover and potentially have extra AP on 6s with the Warlord trait and Relic, and more importantly, you can pay the 2 command points to shoot twice at your target. This is particularly good if you buff your Basilisk up into the sky, maybe have it stood next to your Old Grudge's Warlord trait commander to get 4 rerolls to wound against your intended target, perhaps be Cadian for reroll 1s, and maybe use that Warlord trait and Relic so it's ignoring cover and has extra AP on 6s. You could even combine all of this with the flat 3 damage tank ace strats for a potentially ludicrous amount of damage. If you have the majority of these buffs active, then you could very easily one-shot an enemy vehicle, no matter where it is on the map. With the proper investment, they really can be brutal. You also have the option of spending 2 command points on the Aerial Spotter stratagem from the main codex. This allows the Basilisk to re-roll all failed hits. To be honest, I find this stratagem fairly mediocre on its own, but if you pile that onto using the shooting twice, and all of the other buffs that we mentioned, then the damage output gets even more silly. I wouldn't make routine use of this one, but it's always there if you need to squeeze out a little bit more damage. Aside from that, you also have the Heavy Bolter and Heavy Stubber. As Basilisks are a bit cheaper, over the course of an army you will have a few more Heavy Bolter and Heavy Stubber shots if you take them over Manticores. It's not much, but it's not nothing. And finally, Basilisks have the option of being fielded in greater numbers than the Manticore, due to their Vehicle Squadron special rule allowing you to field 3 of them for each heavy support choice. This is great for getting around the rule of 3, and it means that if heavy support choices are at a bit of a premium in your army, say you filled them up with Rosses and heavy weapon teams or something, then this is actually a legitimate advantage. So overall, before the Greater Good book was released, I generally preferred the Basilisk. That Vigilist detachment just puts it over the edge for me. It gives some very good buffs and allows us to trade some command points for some increased damage, which before the Greater Good was certainly something that we struggled to do as guard players. Following the release of the book, it's a little bit less clear. In particular, the tank ace for a flat 3 damage stratagem is certainly a bit more of a draw to the Manticore, though it does work absolutely fine on the Basilisk too. And that 1 command point direct fire stratagem is also a boon in favour of the Manticore, particularly if it already happens to be a tank ace with flat 3 damage. Overall, I think I'm still just about on the team Basilisk, but I think that these 2 units are more balanced than ever, and you're really not going to be penalised too much by taking one over the other. They'll both do a very reasonable job of putting the firepower you paid for on the targets of your choosing. So which one do you prefer, the Manticore or the Basilisk? And have you had the chance to rain down flat 3 damage death on your opponents yet? I have, and I have to say it was very satisfying. If you've enjoyed this video, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics for more Imperial Guard videos every second day. And if you'd like to help support the channel, I do have a Patreon page where you can pledge support to help keep these videos coming, as well as making it a bit more financially possible to focus on this at the expense of my more real world job. There are also early videos each week, voting on the future of the channel, and the occasional prize giveaway as well. Thank you to my current Patreons, and any support that you can spare is much appreciated if you are enjoying these videos. Thanks very much for listening. I'll hope to see you guys next time.